Hello, and welcome to Rallying the Forge. I'm your host, Solmer. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Rallying the Forge. I'm Solmer, and in today's episode, we are going to discuss my internal testing process a little bit. I'm going to give you kind of an overview, and then in future episodes, I plan to record some of my matches and maybe discuss certain things that go on within those. But for now, I'm going to give you an overview of kind of what I do in my internal testing, because aside from playing real players, there's no good way to test, and I don't have like a local group of players that I can test against, and online the queue is not reliable enough to give me a good idea whether a deck's good or not, even though the queue is generally pretty tough with decks. But you can face the same people over and over and over, and I want more of a variety, and so within my collection I try to have a wide variety of deck types. Sometimes I don't have that, like right now I don't have an RSD deck in my testing batch, but that's one of the decks that can be added. I just took one out after my previous series, so sometimes things are missing. I don't have any Drix Apocomancer decks in here right now. I had 3 relatively recently. I also retired those out as they had been played, and I haven't made any new ones yet. So you can see on your screen, this is what I call my matrix, and this is all my matches. I have 34 decks. I've cut that down from 50 to, at one point I think I had almost 100 decks, and it was just too much. So I've cut it down to 34 decks at a time, which is still a lot, but I can get through it in a week, week and a half, 2 weeks tops if I'm playing regularly, even if it's just a match or two a day. So this is the matrix, and basically this will show all the deck's records against another deck. They're numbered 1 through 34, and at the top also 1 through 33. The 34th deck would not have anything for itself, and the first deck has a black box there blocking that. So I have a bunch of fields here to things that I think are important to an extent. Obviously, their deck record, which gives you a win percentage. And then I have the opponent's win percentage. So all the decks they face, on the far right side, you can see the opponent's record. Not necessarily, it's not against them. It's just if you want a specific deck, you'd have to look at here, like right here, the number 2 deck, Engulfed River of Hantu, is what my deck's titled. It is 0-2 against the number 1 deck. So the number 1 deck is 2-0 against it. And you can see his record, it's highlighted. So I've added some scripting there to allow the highlights, and makes it easier to see the data I'm looking for when I'm looking at a deck. For example, this deck right here, its opponent's win percentage is 56.98, basically 56%, 57%. Let me show you a different view. So I have a standings page, and this shows, and hopefully this is coming out, I hope it's really coming in good so I don't have to re-record this or anything, but so the green decks are all ones I have made in physical. I've all my decks I try to use are typically physical. I don't use digital decks because part of my purpose is to find decks I can use for like Worlds, perhaps. I do have a really good deck that's not in the pool anymore. It was initially, but it's just tested out basically, that I did use at Worlds this past year. And if I come up with nothing else, I will use it again. I do have some good decks here at the top that are above 80% win rate, but that's still dependent on what they've faced, and I'd have to look through the matrix to see if they've faced any other good decks or whatnot. But you have the opponent's win percentage. You can see how difficult it is. So this top deck here has had the hardest road, and it's 50%. So to me, that's not terrible, but it's not great. I mean, if it was like 8-0 and had that, then that would be really significant. But you know, it just gives you an idea. So I say pretty much anything above 60% on opponent win percentage is, that means they've had a difficult group of decks to play against. Anything below 50% has been pretty easy. So, for example, you can see 3 decks here with 0%, and they're below the 50% mark. So they could be subject to removal soon. One of them I'm definitely removing soon. I'm going to put the RC deck in, the new one that we have. So also I should note with this, I have my account and my son's account. So for physical decks, I can easily swap them to his account and back and forth as needed. But I try not to be swapping decks back and forth. It's can be a pain. It's tedious, but I'll do it when we're making decks, and it's like, okay, he's going to have this deck. And then normally he tells me what he wants, or if I make something really bonkers and he really likes it, he just wants it, and I'll move it to his account. So both the accounts decks are included in here. It's a smaller portion, his to mine, because I have majority of our decks on my account. So, but nonetheless. So this is just the standings I updated after each match I play, just to see where decks are, and then at the end of the whole thing, that's when it matters, because that's when I look like, do I need to eliminate any decks? And right now, this bottom one looks like I'm probably going to eliminate it. Decks that have only had 2 matches, I probably won't yet. This one has played an average schedule. I might give it one more round to see if it can boost up its, get some wins, or a win even. Sometimes I've played decks and I just know, like, this deck's not working. It just needs to go. And so I'll get rid of them as needed. I don't know if there's any other ones right now. The life gain one might be one that I take out. We'll see by the end of the whole thing how I feel. And then what I'll do is I'll inject new decks. So just to show my collection manager, my fused decks page. So the gray decks at the top here are strictly made for completing daily quests. When you need to do beasts, dinosaurs, whatever it's been, I've made a deck for my account. And then these red decks I can't use because the deck half that I need, my son took for one of his decks, which right now has not been doing well, but it's been played through TTS and not the client. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so we'll see. If I end up breaking that up, I will take that deck back and reactivate my 4 decks that I had. I didn't really get to play them, to play test them, because TTS initially wasn't working with the Blighted Forgeborns, so I don't have any testing with those, but now there was a way, somehow there was a way to get it to work if you load in individual decks or something. So nonetheless, they're there. And then of course I've got my Worlds deck. Orange decks that are flagged orange, they are strong decks. I don't know if they're Worlds quality, but they are very strong decks, and they definitely can win matches. They can beat Worlds type decks when they go off. So those are strong decks to me. The blue are kind of mid-tier decks in my opinion, and they're just kept around just because, well, I haven't gone through enough decks where I've got a list of 20 solid decks or anything like that. I'm working towards it, but not there yet. And then also, like I said, the green decks I have in physical, they're made in physical. The orange and blue and gold deck are also probably in physical form. Pretty sure they all are. And then I don't have any digital decks with any digital halves currently, I don't think. As I said, I try to avoid that if I can, just because I don't want to get a really good deck and then only be able to play it online. If they get to the point where they're doing the print on demand, then sure, we can look at that. But yeah, so this is the deck list I have. Like I said, I've got 67 decks minus 11, so 56 decks that I need to filter through. I'm only using 34 of them. So I've got about 20 decks that are not in the testing phase yet because I haven't eliminated enough yet. There are some in here I still need, like the First to Die. I can probably get rid of that one. That one I made special for a match with Gorgeous. I think it's a triple corrupt deck, and he had one as well, and we played. He beat me like every time. So, but that deck's not a serious deck. It was just for fun. But yeah, as I eliminate decks, I try to keep my son's account. What's he got here? He's at like 15, 16. Yeah, so he's at 16. I try to keep him in that ballpark, 12 to 16, 12 to 15 ish. I think I'm gonna get rid of his RC deck, and he's got the second RC deck, so we got an upgraded version that I said I think would work better. He's got the same half he's pairing it with, which is probably our best Necrium deck that we have. But I haven't tested with it. I know he's played it quite a bit and he likes it, but I have not played it. I have not played a whole lot of RC. I've played against a lot of RC, haven't played it myself, so I'm not necessarily the strongest player at it, but I do know how to play it. I'm just not I'm not like Nathus playing when he plays his RC deck. I'm not playing flawlessly. So there's just decisions to make. When I find bad decks or decks that just aren't working, I'll get them out. I'll retire them. You can see my retired deck list is really long. You can see all the digital decks I've made over time for different things. You got sealed events, just all sorts of stuff. That's all my decks I retire out, or I archive rather, is how the website does it. I archive the decks. I just keep a list because you never know. You might want to go back and be like, you know what, this deck wasn't so bad, and maybe there's a new feature in the game and might make it good. So it's just kind of a log of what I've had over time. So, but these are decks to choose from for me. As I eliminate decks, I add decks back in, and then we go through a series. I am currently on series 11. Obviously I started at series 1, and it's changed over time. Maybe I'll do an episode showing how that's happened, kind of how I got to where I'm at today. But basically I have a main bracket. I call it the champions bracket, and then I have a redemption bracket, which is basically the losers bracket, and then I have so the top bracket is only 16 decks. It's just under half of the total decks that I'm testing with. And then at the bottom I have what I call the play-in event. So for the bottom 3 seeds, so 14, 15, and 16 in the main bracket, they have to play their way in, so to speak. And I have matchups of the decks. And so the standings that I already showed you determine where the decks are and how they get placed. So at the start of this one, you can see the standings at the top. This was the order they were in after any changes I made from the previous bracket, which I don't think I made any changes as far as decks go from the previous one, because I made a lot of changes from 9 to 10. So if I make changes with a deck, it gets removed. All of its matches gets removed. Its data is removed from all the decks. Typically, it's a bad deck I'm removing. When I'm removing a bad deck, the decks that had wins against it, they lose those wins. They lose any of that data against them or for them. And it can change the end of standings from at the end of one series into the start of the next. But after I enter new decks in, and I resort the standings, I basically copy and paste it into here, and they get their 1 through 34, whatever that ends up being. There's no favoritism whatsoever. It just is what the numbers are, and then they match up. They autofill for me into their seeds, and it tells me the matches, and then I play the matches. So prior to this week, I did all of my matches almost exclusively in TTS, which is Tabletop Simulator on Steam, because on that I can go in here and load up SolForge Fusion, and I can control both sides of the board. I can control both decks. I can play them both. If you play in the app, you can play your own decks on your account, and the AI plays one of them, you play one of them. Well, the AI is atrocious. Horrible deck player. They don't have a smart AI, so to speak. So it's not effective. It's not useful for testing. So I use TTS, and I used it for every match that I did. Well, now I have my computer set up. I have my roommate's Surface that I can use I have 2 Steam accounts, one for my son, one for me. And now I'm able to play matches when it's one of my decks against my son's account. I can do them in the client, and I can still control both in TTS. Let me let's load these in real quick. So if you're not familiar with TTS, this would all be new to you. I'm not advocating for use of TTS or not to use TTS. I think it's been a great tool. It's a great tool for me for internal testing. I wish I could, on my account, control both decks in a match, so I can just do all my testing in the client. I don't need TTS anymore. I can just do it in the client. But let me switch the screen here. So I've got the decks pulled up, and I have to look. Let's see. This is going to use this Forgeborn, and that one's using that Forgeborn. Pretty sure. Why am I being messaged so much? Okay. So I picked the Forgeborns, and I picked Start Game. And then it's going to tell me randomly which player goes first. There is a bug where it never flips this one at the start, and this one also doesn't flip, so then I just flip that one. This has not been updated. It's not optimized for set 3 and anything because they came out with the digital client, so they it has bugs. It's not perfect. But so now I can see both hands, and I can play. I would swivel the board around, and I would continue to play. So going back to this, when the match is complete, I put in the result. I log it in my matrix, and then I update the standings, and I go on to the next match. So this is the basics of me doing the internal testing and kind of the gist of what I do. Decks go through. When they win the whole thing, they get to that point, they're good. Down here, they play basically for a second place match with all the decks. They get basically like a double elimination format, and then we go on. I feel like this format works well because the lower decks, lower ranked decks, have an opportunity to get a bunch of matches in if they're going to progress. Obviously, when they do lose the first round match that they have, they're out. They're done, and it just sinks them more towards the bottom. But these decks are, for the most part, are supposed to be easy decks that they should be able to beat something. Sometimes they don't. But, there's decks down here that are good. So, for example, you can see on the screen here, this deck right here is a really strong deck. It may not be good enough for, like, Worlds, or it might be. It's in my opinion, it's one of those decks that could be in the orange tier. But it has struggled with certain matchups. Let's see what its record is. So it's the 5th deck. It's 4-2. It's had a low opponent win percentage, but it's 4-2. And I know it lost to this deck, which I was close to just eliminating because I didn't think it was that strong of a deck, but it started working really well lately against these decks. So, maybe some of the decks I took out that it struggled against, like the Drix Apocomancer decks, maybe that's helped it kind of shine right now. But this deck, and then this deck has played here, and it's advancing along. We'll see how far it gets and how it does, but it has a chance to go and get its win numbers up and progress itself in my standings, so to speak. But yeah, it's a process I go through. It's kind of like, I don't know a great analogy for it, but you're filtering, and then you filter some stuff out, and then you pour more in, and you're filtering more, and that's kind of the process. So that's what I've been doing with it, and I can kind of go more in depth with some things as I do some matches or show some updates. That's what we'll be doing in some future episodes. I just wanted to do a little quick one and put this out there, and I will definitely be recording some of my matches and discussing them as we go through them. So I appreciate everyone watching, and hopefully you found this interesting and useful, or not, maybe not, but everyone has different processes for how they determine if decks are good. Some people can just put stuff together and know. I'm not that person. I need to test and test and test until I'm really confident that the deck's solid. And eventually I'll have enough decks that I think are good enough that I'll have them all test against each other to see what deck continually rises to the top amongst those. But it's just a process. It's time. And as we get new sets out, I have to bring in those cards and make new decks as well. So that's also another thing that happens. And I got a list of decks to make that I haven't even made yet, but I need to filter these ones down so I can, so I don't have 100 decks I'm trying to sort through. I want to cut my list down. It's already too big now. I want to cut it down by 15, 20 decks maybe, and then I can make some more decks, maybe 10 decks, add them to the queue, and go from there. So, yeah, thank you again for watching. Thanks for taking the time, supporting the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time. This has been an episode of Rallying the Forge. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.